Is Donald Levying War? Welcome to Law and Society. Today I just want to briefly talk about this because I've been thinking about, National Guard deployments, and I was reading Professor Heather Cox Richardson's Letters from an American, and I don't reference that in this talk, but she was talking about deployment of National Guard in the 19th century, in the 1800s, and I think it's an important context to read about how uh, the National Guard has been historically used. But I was looking at Guard deployments, and in the last 80 years, 80 plus years of American history, there have been there have been countless Guard deployments because the National Guard is meant to perform several functions like helping civilian society through disasters. I remember the Guard being there after Hurricane Sandy in New York when I was volunteering there, and any place that I went to volunteer, like after Hurricane Katrina, even after 2 years, there was a Guard presence there. And their Guard goes out, National Guard does civilian work, does service for the state in which they are from on a regular basis. But when you talk about federal deployment of troops, I was looking at it, and President Eisenhower activated the Arkansas National Guard to integrate schools in Arkansas after the Brown v. Board of Education ruling. And then there were the riots after the Rodney King beating, and that in the 1992 Los Angeles riots, there were few dozens of people killed and $1 billion of damage. And in that, the National Guard of California in all its capacities, as well as federal forces, as well as local forces, were involved, and thousands were arrested. And fast forward to 2020, the George Floyd riots, Black Lives Matter riots, about 19 people, or is it 16 people, died because of it, and there were thousands that were arrested. And during that, the Guards were deployed in D.C., and I believe that there were Guard deployments in some other states as well. But what is different from what I can't really recall in the last 100 years a time that the president has federalized the Guard of one state to go into another state to perform federal functions, whatever they may be. And when you federalize the Guard of one state and then move it to another to perform what is necessarily federal functions, because you have federalized the Guard, whether with Abbott's consent or not. I mean, great, Abbott is providing aid and comfort to Donald Trump, levying war. But I thought about what happened in Chicago with the grappling down from the buildings and, zip tying naked children, detaining 37 people and letting others go. These arbitrary and these fascist ways in which ICE and DHS is carrying out raids across Chicagoland and Illinois is already happening. Now the federalization of the Guard, mind you, Donald Trump doesn't have the consent of Governor Pritzker to federalize the Illinois Guard. So what does he do? He gets, this overzealous governor from Texas to deploy Texas Guard, which is now currently in Illinois, training for what they're going to do. God only knows what they're going to do. I would bet to say that they're not going to do anything different from what they did in Los Angeles and in California, where a federal court has held their actions to be in violation of the Posse Comitatus Act. So Illinois has sued to stop the Guard deployment in the greater Chicago area. The judge didn't immediately issue any restraining order and asked for the government, the federal government, to reply Donald Trump's regime. And there's a hearing that's going to happen on Thursday on whether the TRO will be granted. But it made me think about our country's treason statute. And I was reading about, treason and sedition just because we are living in the times and because we are seeing the current federal regime create enemies out of thin air and calling anti-fascists potential domestic terrorists. And so I looked at treason. The three places that I could think of that I saw treason statute. So treason was something that our founding fathers were very much concerned with. So in Article 3 of the Constitution, which is about courts, the Constitution says, treason against the United States shall consist only of levying war against them being the United States, the states in the Union. Not the country, the United States, but the country as a whole and each of the states shall consist only of levying war against them, meaning the states, or adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. So then you go to Article 2, which is the presidential article that talks about the powers of the president, but there you have the impeachment clause, which answers the question of whether you can actually hold a president accountable for treason or not. And the answer to that question is yes. Constitutionally, yes. Theoretically, yes. Because the impeachment clause of Article 2 says the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, and or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now, if you look at further into the treason statute, 18 U.S.C. 2381 says, whoever owing allegiance to the United States levies war against them. Again, owing allegiance to the United States, country as a whole, but also this second clause here, levies war against them. That word them implies the states that make up the United States. So when Donald Trump deploys Texas's troops, National Guard troops, to Illinois for federal purpose, it is essentially a federal army going into Illinois without the consent of Illinois' governor and Illinois' elected leaders. Texas National Guard is not in their own state. And so the question arises whether Donald Trump can legally send the Guard from one state to another, undermining the purpose of the Guard in Texas, the governor's consent notwithstanding, the personal harm caused to the Texas National Guard for leaving their jobs and doing this in Illinois when they don't know exactly what they're doing, and the infringement of states' rights and state sovereignty of Illinois by bringing federal forces out of state federal forces, not federalizing the Illinois National Guard, although Donald Trump has said that he's going to do that as well. If he ends up using Texas's National Guard in Illinois, that is using the federal forces without the consent of the governor and the government of Illinois. So essentially invading Illinois. And Donald Trump has talked about the war within and has talked about Portland and Oregon and how he's sending in the military to, stop the war within. So how is what Donald Trump doing now not levying war? If you look at the definition of levying war, there has to be an actual assemblage of men for the treasonable purpose to constitute a levying war. So, there is an assemblage of 300 Texas guardsmen in Illinois right now. And what is treason, by the way? Treason under Roman and Germanic law is the crime of attacking a state authority to which one owes allegiance. And Donald Trump owes allegiance to take care that the laws be faithfully executed throughout the country, and he owes allegiance not to levy war against one of the states of the Union by federalizing the guard of another state and bringing it into Illinois absent the consent and absent the emergency that Donald Trump is purporting there is in both Portland and Chicago. But what I'm talking about mostly now is Chicago and any other state that Donald Trump goes into where he takes the guard of another state with him. Because that is not at all different than sending the federal army. So how is what Donald Trump doing right now in Illinois not levying war on Illinois? Because Illinois is a sovereign state. It has sovereign power and sovereign rights. It has its policing power through the National Guard if the government of Illinois, based in Springfield, Illinois, and in Greater Chicago, with the mayors of the Greater Chicago area and Brandon Johnson, the mayor of Chicago, they are the ones who would partake in law enforcement activity in Chicago and in Illinois were there to be any violent riots or any type of invasion or war within that Donald Trump may be talking about. But Donald Trump is preempting all of that, federalizing Texas Guard, bringing it into Illinois, and saying that there's an emergency where there is no emergency, where they are already conducting ICE DHS raids, and they're expecting nobody to protest because, National Security Presidential Memorandum 7 essentially makes anybody who does not hold the same ideology as Donald Trump's fascist regime to be a domestic terrorist. If you hold anti-fascist beliefs, then you are a potential domestic terrorist. That's the posture of the current federal regime. So this is a serious topic, and I want you all to comment on it and tell me what you think about it, because is Donald Trump levying war in Illinois when he sends the Texas National Guard to invade Chicago? It's a gray area. He is assembling people there with the intention of attacking a state authority to which he owes allegiance, which is one of the states of the United States. And that seems to violate 18 U.S.C. 2381 and the treason clause of Article 3, and it should trigger an impeachment and removal. But in this political atmosphere with this Congress, that is not a possibility. But remember that when the Democrats gain House and Senate majority in a year and a half, in less than a year and a half, I believe that is the only way that we're going to see anything close to holding Donald Trump accountable for treason for levying war on the various states by taking federal armies into those states without the consent of those states. So for now, if you're going out to protest, do so peacefully, do so peacefully. Never, ever physically, ever touch any law enforcement, especially not federal law enforcement. Always stay behind the line where they are telling you to stay. Remain on public property, record everything, take friends with you, take water with you. They are pepper spraying and shooting rubber bullets at protesters in Chicago, and peaceful protesters in Chicago, and they are employing tactics that are akin to what you would see in a fascist regime. It's a baby fascist regime because they're only now using rubber bullets and non-lethals, but there's room for escalation. And you can see that we're far closer to that escalation than to a peaceful and tranquil society for the general welfare of the public, which is what a president of the United States is supposed to uphold by taking care that the laws be faithfully executed. Instead, Donald Trump is declaring war on American states. Ask yourself, is that treason? And make that voice heard when you come to the conclusion that yes, what Donald Trump is doing is breaking his oath to protect and defend all of the United States. With that said, thank you so much for listening. Please like, share, and subscribe, and I'll talk to you soon.